Thank you for staying with us. Now, what's happening in Zimbabwe right now is quite intense because this is because President Mnangagwa's party is trying to change the constitution so he can stay in power past his 2028 term, and they want to keep him until 2030. So naturally, all the activists and opposition figures like Job Sikhala and Tendai Biti are completely furious and have started campaigning hard against it, both domestically and internationally. But the government is not taking that criticism lightly because they're accused of using state security agents to totally crack down on anyone who speaks out. We're talking about opposition events getting busted up, buildings getting set on fire, and critics getting slapped with crazy charges. I'll take Job Sikhala, for instance. He got arrested down in South Africa for having explosives, but he swears the Zimbabwean state security guys or agents planted the evidence just to frame him and shut down the opposition. So it is a really, it's really looking like a desperate fight to silence anyone against the 2030 plan. And today, on the conversation, I'm joined by Nozipho Zypo Moyo. She's Executive Director, Africa Kiburi in Washington, D.C., USA. Thank you so much, Nozipho, for joining us at this time.
Thank you for having me again.
So generally, let's have your thoughts on what is going on in Zimbabwe at the moment.
What is happening in Zimbabwe at the moment is how ZANU-PF is continuously having a strong, firm hand to push to achieve what they want as a party versus what is needed by the people. So they would use anything and everything, any tool. Like right now, they're speaking of using the tool, they're speaking of amending the constitution so that they can be in power. This is about partisan a political party that wants to hold the whole country hostage for a lifetime. And it's not surprising. Remember, ZANU came and conquered with Mugabe. If it was not for the coup, Mugabe would have died in that seat. And the current president, who was also the right hand of Mugabe, is following the same steps where people want to die in power. So there is nothing new. There is nothing new with these tactics.
Okay. Now, Nozipho, President Mnangagwa, we know his term is constitutionally limited to 2, and it's meant to end in 2028, right? But how does the ruling ZANU-PF party, through its annual conference solution, legally justify its directive to initiate the requisite legislative amendments, to extend his presidency up until 2030?
Okay, so understand, before the 2013 referendum and constitution we had, Mugabe had always been in power. And that constitution in 2013 actually came in to highlight that a president can serve 2 terms. Each term is 5 years. After the coup, we had our first election in 2018, where ED pushed to 2023. From 2023, his term has to officially end in 2028, and he can't renew. But as I said, he's a cut from the same cloth of Mugabe, where he wants to still be in power. So that is why he's now talking about the party pushing the constitution, meaning they're going to go for a referendum. Understand the dirty politics that happened in the past election, where suddenly the opposition party was dismantled and Sezo Chawango came and claimed that he's now the leader of opposition. Where Chamisa, who led that coalition as we speak, is currently now in the US. So ZANU infiltrated the political parties, dismantled them, disfigured them, so that they have all the necessary seats and numbers in parliament. So what the party wants is what the party will push. Meaning, if it goes to parliament and we push for a referendum, ZANU will still have the numbers and votes they need. So that is the book. These events did not just wake up where people, because they officially stated that they wish to extend ED's 10 to 2018, that was last year during the Bulawayo Congress. And ED was quiet about it. And he said, I'm subject to the party. And they officially declared it last month in the Mdare Congress. So ED would use the party to push his politics. And remember, there's also functional politics, functional fights within ZANU where they're fighting. He doesn't want his VP to take over. So every script that we see now is something that ZANU has really sat down and they've played out. And that's the reason why Senzo Chabango came. That was the reason why they dismantled the opposition politics. That's the reason why there's a patriotic bill which speaks about individuals and institutions criticizing the government, where you can even be charged with treason. That's the reason we have a PVO bill which now sanctions CSO, civic society players who can come in where the government has surveillance. Where are you getting your money? Are you doing civic education? So this is a plan. It has always been there, and ZANU is just following what it has planned.
Speaking of ZANU just following, even the Vice President, Constantino Chiwenga, is reported to be bitterly opposed to the ED 2030 plan. So how deep really are the divisions within the ZANU-PF? And, could a Chiwenga-aligned faction, potentially join with the opposition to block the two-thirds majority required for a constitutional amendment in Parliament?
Once you are in ZANU, you are always in ZANU. ZANU is a political party that has grown and established to be looters. There is no way Chiwenga would join opposition unless it is for his benefit. The same way the coup. The only reason Chiwenga and the military came was because they needed to sanitize the coup. That is the only time in the history post-colonial Zimbabwe we find the military bedding with the citizens. And people thought that was democracy. No, that was ED having engaged Chiwenga to say, let's take over. The only time you would see Chiwenga or anyone of influence, like right now, Boda Gezi, the war veteran, is the one telling people to protest. And the reason why people are not going on the streets, because they know even if we protest, we're protesting to as we're being used as pawns in the chess game for ZANU elites. It has nothing to do with citizens. So if Chiwenga has to do that, it has nothing to do with citizens. It will never benefit the citizens. It is to sanitize and give credibility to the international court and justify the amends.
All right. Now, the opposition is also facing attacks on premises like the Sappers Trust, the arbitrary arrests as well. Is the targeting of figures like Job Sikhala and Tendai Biti, would you say it is merely an expression of political rivalry, or does the evidence point directly to state orchestrated campaign to weaponize the criminal justice system against these critics, as suggested by Human Rights Watch?
It is state security is the one that is coming in and behind all this nonsense. And when I say state security, I'm even involving thugs within the ZANU-PF ruling party. We currently have the Herbert Chitepo School of Ideology used to brainwash under the disguise of patriotism. We've got the Green Bombers, the Boda Gezi, more like your National Youth Service. All those are agencies that are used by the ZANU-PF to provide state terror. And the reason why specifically Job Sikhala is being targeted, remember, opposition has died. The only member who can ignite the coalition and the opposition within the citizens is Job Sikhala, who was unlawfully detained for over 600 days. That's over 2 years. 2 years. As I explained to you, Chamisa has officially left Zimbabwe. He's now in Harvard. Who was the president of that coalition? The other person who comes in with the military vigor is Job Sikhala and the Tendai Bitis. And that is why they are specifically being shut down. Then the SERPS offices, that's where most of the human rights and democracy CSOs were going to meet. That was a space where they come in and say, as citizens and as these institutions, let us stand up and make sure we fight against this. And interestingly, that's when Aston happened. If you follow the whistleblower Hopewell had actually informed Job Sikhala the previous week when he was in Botswana to say, are you aware you have surveillance behind you? Are you aware you have surveillance behind you? What a coincidence that when he moves to South Africa without any explosives, someone comes to say, I need something in your car. Coincidentally, within 10 minutes after he leaves the venue, a police car is suddenly doing a random search, coincidentally. This is how ZANU has always operated. And you should understand, ZANU is not just a political party, but it has agencies and stretches even to other countries. That's the reason why people would move, ZANU loyalists to move to Tanzania. You know what happens after? And so forth. So we as citizens believe and that these are this is state that is actually trying to silence. I mean, what is the coincidence? What is the coincidence?
Well, speaking of coincidences, right? I might even ask you, two questions in one. But then the first, the government recently enacted the Patriotic Bill, which is, the Criminal Law Codification and Reform Amendment Bill 2022. How has this specific piece of legislation, been used to shrink the space of freedom of expression and association? And, how does it enable the government to even target NGOs that are deemed to have a political affiliation? Because according to Amnesty International, police arrested more than 160 people in one period. And that's including elected officials and journalists, while the U.S. State Department's 2024 reports also cites that credible reports of torture, cruel, inhuman, or even degrading treatment. So how do these figures affect, the prospect of a free and fair electoral cycle in 2028 or in 2030? That's if the bill comes to light, if, the change happens.
Okay, speaking of assumptions, before I answer your question, speaking of assumptions, you would, if you would know, when the rumor started of the 2030 extension by last year, a document leaked, and it speaks about what happens after 2030. It talks about extensions where we can even have ED having an extra 10 to 15 years. And that is the reason why we have all these amendments happening in the laws. The Patriotic Bill, specifically being the one that is silencing the people, and the PVO bill monitoring that there are no resources that are used to fuel civic uprising. So, as I explained earlier on, ZANU functions as a well-oiled machine. There is nothing which is a coincidence. Everything is well thought. And this was the reason why they had to push. Remember when ED came, there were more than 352 laws that needed to be rectified and put within from the Constitution. There was no drive from ZANU and its members because they were clear. We're not here to save the interest of the people. We're here to make sure the leader and our party stays in power, because that is what parties and politics want. And that is why they focused on such bills, which are there to silence citizens and citizen institutions. So more would happen. And even if they say we no longer have POSA, which talks about arresting people, free movement, they reintroduce MOPA, which is like redressing. So all these laws are here to silence, to shrink the civic space, and to have authoritarian rule. Thank you.
All right, so let's quickly speak on the economy because the government's just launched the new gold-backed ZIG currency aiming for stability. But does any currency reform stand a chance, if the political environment is volatile, and the threats of all these unconstitutional paragraphs is hanging over the market?
The reality is that you can have all the gold, you can have all the oil, but markets are not decided by your wealth as a sovereign state. Your wealth as a sovereign state is guided and marked across to risk of stability. So as long as there's no stability, corruption is happening, there's not been, the government has not addressed the genocide that even happened. They're even having hearings now. Anyone will be skeptical to come in. The few investors that come in are people who are within, looting, corrupt, and all. But no matter how rich you are as a country, Zimbabwe being very blessed in those natural resources, it can only take us so far. Because it's not because we don't have resources. Corruption. And where is this corruption? Corruption is the trunk, the bark of the tree we see. But the roots are within ZANU. Who is ZANU? ZANU is this animal that has created a system that has captured the military, the state security, the media, the courts, because there is no referendum bill they have proposed that has never succeeded because they have the tools to do so. So unless and until there is investor confidence within our gold, that's how biased economies are. It's not how rich you are. It's not how educated you are. That's not how the markets work, unfortunately. So whether you put the ZIG, how many times have we changed our currencies? From the bond note, the barrier checks, the ZIG dollar, the foreign currency. We're a multi-currency country as well. So no matter how we call it, how we change it, where different actors come in, unless and until that corruption is sorted and we have stability, that's when our gold and resources can actually work for the welfare of the citizens, not the elite within the ZANU that can be gifting individuals cars when there are no roads, where someone can buy a watch for $500,000 but would never be questioned.
All right. Now, we've actually seen similar moves to scrap or even extend term limits, which have actually happened across Africa. So can you tell us if the SADC has applied any meaningful pressure or even criticism to this?
Come again?
The SADC. Have they applied any, meaningful pressure or criticism to this?
Everyone has had criticism, I'll be honest, but who is your handler? If you could answer who is your handler, you would know how much criticism people can push and how much people are really willing to go. So, as I said, the narrative changes really when it's about who's your handler and what are they trying to achieve. So criticism has been there, but I like how you're bringing it that this has been an African trend. We notice how ED has brought in Tabire and positioned him in the central committee, meaning he can rise within the party because he wishes he'll be his successor. So for some reason, Chiwenga, since the fights, decides to do another military coup. Probably that's one of the alternatives that can happen in Zimbabwe because he runs the military. But how much strength does he have in the military? Remember, most of these commanders in the military suspiciously died. We had over 10 put to the hero's acre. And that is why people would argue that ED is making sure he does not have trouble in pursuing the succession. So there's never any revolutionary change that happens with political parties. That is why we see from MDC to that coalition, the infiltration, it has not worked. 14% of that can happen if you come in with the military, and that is how we even attain that independence, and that is why we have the Sahel nations. The third, and what I would recommend, and for me, which is the greatest possibility for the Zimbabwe uprising, will be civic uprising. I'll give you a recent case study of Nepal. That, for me, would be an alternative where people would take back its power, their power. That is the only time we can say we are going to see changes. Otherwise, no political party would ever change what is happening in Zimbabwe, because remember what I said, ZANU is a well-oiled machine with roots. So you can change the actors, but you do not change the script. So the only way to get rid of ZANU and everything around it will be that non-violent protest led by citizens. Ideally to be a 2017 coup without the military. So nothing would work for now. Zimbabweans will be toyed and they will dance according to ZANU, how ED says, and what the party wants. That is the reality. Thank you.
Okay. Now, let's talk about the international community as well and what they have to say about all these happenings in Zimbabwe, because especially following warnings from figures like U.S. Congressman, that's Gregory Meeks, what actions is the West likely to take if the constitutional amendments are pushed through? Do you think that the government views such an external pressure as unwarranted interference in internal affairs, as it has previously stated?
People now have their own problems. The West is still trying to recover from COVID. When they go to the G20s, the focus is on Russia, the war. The focus is on the China, the tariffs. Zimbabwe is 2% of the African population. If it was in Nigeria, it's just a village. No one is, the same West ignored the genocide for years. They only talk about it because they're falling short with our leaders. So I don't see, the world is falling apart. Everyone is trying to work on their economies. Everyone is focusing on immigration. There is nothing that the West can do except to write press statements and declare and condone the abuse of human rights, of human laws. But does it even mean the West are also following human rights or democracy? We know today it's a different question. The SADC, we know the SADC, most of them are run by the revolutionary parties, where Thabo Mbeki was coming in, the former president of South Africa, to intervene. And the collapse of Zimbabwe has helped South Africa, where it's having Zimbabwe as its greatest what they're exporting to Zimbabwe. It's the highest exporter in the region. So they'll just be silent. They know Zimbabweans are being displaced because of poverty going to South Africa, but in terms of South African trade, it's working for them. So everyone is busy sorting out their house, and it's up to Zimbabweans how we sort it out. Otherwise, all this is diplomacy show. These are diplomacy shows to come in and say, oh, what are we saying? I mean, what just happened in Tanzania, Doshi?
I like how you said it's left for Zimbabweans to, to come and sort themselves out. It brings me to, because we know that Zimbabwe has a massive, highly educated diaspora, like yourself. So how is the current atmosphere of, the political repression and also economic collapse affecting the likelihood of, professionals from diaspora ever returning?
We return, we don't return. Zimbabwe right now, when it comes to production, we lost it. Remember, when we got our independence, our dollar was equivalent to the pound, not the US dollar. Because of sanctions and corruption, we are where we are. But what has made Zimbabwe survive are the remittances and tax. There are over 51 taxes in Zimbabwe, and that's how the government has been able to make money, to sustain, to still loot and cushion the elites. So the role of people in the diaspora, for people like us now, is to be able to sustain our families back home. Because if you look at the unemployment rate, there's a lot. So the role is for people to come in with resources. That is the diaspora, and that is what people have been doing with remittances. But more importantly, we still need the resource of people on the ground to eventually say, we need to deal with this. And if for some reason things have to change in Zimbabwe, no one would ever want to be away from home. No one would want to be away from home. Everyone will come in because we do have the skills, we do have the education and all, but the system has choked and vomited people outside. So there is hope. There is hope, but it's only up to Zimbabweans to push for what they want.
All right. Well, I don't know. Do you have any final thoughts that you would want to say in 1 minute just before we wrap up?
Okay. I just want to urge and encourage everyone in Zimbabwe that we don't have an issue in tribe shown as Develes. We don't have an issue on who's rich, who's wrong. The only thing we need to deal with is to deal with ZANU. If we can agree that ZANU is what has brought us to our knees, ZANU is what has made it a spectacle, then Zimbabwe can rise and be great again. ZANU brought us into this mess. Surely ZANU cannot solve the problems of the mess they created. So let us work with any and every entity that is trying to bring that positive change, and we see how we can emancipate ourselves. Thank you so much.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Nozipho Zypo Moyo, for your time and for speaking to us. She's Executive Director, Africa Kiburi in Washington, D.C. Thank you once again.
Thank you, ma'am.